Hello and welcome to Production Bytes. Today I'm going to be following on from the last tutorial where I showed you how to produce live sounding drum and bass drums. And today I'm going to be focusing on how to incorporate guitars into drum and bass and how to blend that together convincingly with the sub bass and bass line. So this time around we've already got our drums completed and I've added in the sub bass and the bass line and the guitars. Again, we're just going to focus on the drop, as the way of producing is pretty much the same throughout the track. And so quickly now, I'll show you what it sounds like without any effects on the guitar or the bass. And then I'll jump into how to produce them. And without the drums. So the way I like to mix is I'll start from the ground up. I'll start with drums, then I'll add in the bass, then I'll add in rhythm parts like guitars, and then synths. So the first thing to start on here is the bass. Now I've got two bass parts, the sub bass and the filter bass. Firstly with the sub bass, all I've got on that is a parametric EQ, and it's got no processing at all on it. It was literally just there so I could see the harmonics and the fundamental frequency when I was designing the sound. So as you can see, it's mostly low end. There's a few harmonics up to about 200 Hz, but then it tails off pretty quickly. Now this is great when you're designing the sound, however you'll get a much harsher, better sub-bass tone if you then add some more harmonics. So what I've done here is I've sent the track straight off to a second track, and on this one I've distorted it using the Fruity Fast distortion twice, which makes it sound like this. And then I've rolled off the low end on it, just so I don't get any interference between the two sounds. And what this means is I've got the sub bass going to my bass bus, and then I've got the top of the sub bass also going to the bass bus, but it allows me to balance the levels between them when I'm mixing. Next, I've got the filter bass, which sounds like this. And this adds to the top of the sound. It also adds a little bit of stereo width in the high end, and just adds a bit more tone to the bass itself. So what I've done with this, again, I've distorted it a little bit to add a few more harmonics and roughen this up a bit. And then I've rolled off the low end sharply, so it's not interfering with the sub bass at all. And I've also taken out 2.5 kHz, as that allowed a bit of space for the kick and the snare to click. You'll also note that I've rolled off above 200 Hz. That way there's no harmonics that are going to interfere with the snare. And lastly, what I've got is a stereo enhancer, and I've turned it slightly off to mono, as it was a bit wide to start with. It didn't really sound natural and blend with the sub bass itself, and this way I've got a little bit of stereo, but it sounds mostly mono and powerful and in the centre. So you can hear when I turn that on, it does blend a lot better with the sub bass. So next up are the guitars. Now I'm not going to talk too much about getting a tone from a guitar amp or guitar amp simulation software. However, what I will say is you want to use your ears on this. So get a sound which sounds good to you and isn't too low end heavy. I know a lot of metal music has really low guitar. However, you do want to have some treble in it. So what I chose is a tone that sounds like this. So it's pretty chunky, it's got a lot of high end, and it's just going to fit in my mid-range and slightly into my treble in my frequency range. And a fairly common technique with guitars is to record it twice and then pan the guitars one left and one right, and then you get a really wide, big sound. What you lose when you do this, however, is the center channel. So the center is where all of the energy is in a track, all the power. It's where the bass is, it's where the kick and the snare are. So the moment you pan left and right, you lose that completely. The way around that is to record the guitar part 3 times and have one of the takes in the center and the other 2 on the left and the right. But then what happens is when it gets played on a radio station which broadcasts in mono, or gets played on a mono club system, is all of these guitar parts get summed together, and it can really muddy up your mix. So a way around this I've found, which I don't know how many people really use, but it works for me, is I'll record a guitar part twice, and the first one will be dead center, and the second one I'll put a stereo enhancer on, and I'll invert one of the channels. It can be left channel or right channel, it doesn't matter, but what that does is it pushes it all the way to the edge of the stereo field, nothing in the center, and it sounds like this. And what I'll often also do on this is then roll off the low end so it's not interfering at all with the low end of the track. Now what this means is that when you sum the tracks together, the left and right channels cancel out, and you just end up with the one stem in the middle of the mix. So there's no muddiness at all that way. When you put the two together, you get this. Which is a really natural, precise sound, and you're achieving that without reverb, which means you don't have any extra tail muddying up your mix. So next, I've put these 2 channels into one mixer track. I've put an exciter on there, and I've turned up the low end exciter all the way and the high end exciter just a little bit, and that makes it sound like this. So that adds a lot of low end. It actually sounds pretty bad now, but the next thing I've done is rolled off the low end sharply. So that gets rid of that really horrible hum I was getting, and I've put a multi-band compressor on it. And what this is doing is it's getting rid of some of the low end, and it's also compressing the high end quite a lot, and also leveling out the mid-range. So it's just taking off a few of the peaks here, while it's doing quite a lot to take off the high end. And this will make it fit in my mix better. When I did this, I turned down the threshold while listening with the drums. So I pulled down the threshold until the drums started to punch through clearer, like this. So you can hear that makes a pretty big difference. Next, I've got just one more parametric EQ, and again, I'm rolling off the low end, as some of these effects can actually create a little bit of distortion in the low end, and it can interfere with your sub. I've also taken a fairly large scoop out of 200 Hz to stop the guitars from interfering with the snare drum. And when you put this together with your sub bass, it blends quite nicely then, because you've got nothing below 100 Hz, and it just starts to blend with the harmonics between 100 and 200 Hz. And as you can hear there, it's a really full sounding mix, but you can also hear there's a lot of space in the high end to put synths in, and vocals, and other effects. It just fills out the energetic part of the track, which is in the low end and the mid-range. The last thing I've done, like last time, is I've put on reverb. And I've sent the initial guitar buses, which has bussed the first 2 stems together, to the reverb. And this is along with the drums, which are already being sent to it. So when you put that together, it really adds a sense of space to the track. And it is subtle, but when you've got the whole track together, it makes a big difference to how natural it sounds. So that's it for this episode. I hope it helped you. Please subscribe, please like. And if you've got any suggestions for future tutorials, head over to our Facebook page, link below, and suggest it. See you next time.